Today's episode is about software integration. It is about getting data from the cloud and to have a look at the challenges and the lessons learned, in the process. The software, was successful in the end, and we're going to look at some of the problems that were faced and whether or not, third-party components like Unidac can help to streamline that process. But to understand this, we need to have a little look at the background. So I used to work in telephony, and basically you could, in those days, businesses would have a PABX, and the PABX would be the interface, shall we say, for your telephone calls between the business and the outside world. And if the manufacturer of the PABX had a driver, or a TSP, then you could write software which would be able to capture that information and, let's say, throw it somewhere and present that to the user in various displays. And one of the programs that we had was a CTI client. Now, the information that you could capture would include things like the phone number. You could work out the trunk that was used, work out how long things were in a queue for, when the time the call connected, and so on. And again, we would package this information up by the CTI server, and using Indie components, send that information to the client. Now, when the call reached, if it was ringing, then we'd have like a little pop-up window which would appear, at the bottom of the screen. And that would allow the user to perform actions such as answering the call. You could enter notes against the call. You could transfer the call to another person, and so on. And so you're looking at a little tiny window. And we had a question or a request from a customer to I want you to get the name associated with the phone number from their Salesforce database. The request itself is not that outlandish. Came time to dealing with this, let's say a CRM that required some deeper integration, and in order to be able to keep the system running at a level where it did not impact on the user's experience in a negative way. And one of the some of the challenges then that we would face were about using the API authentication and so on. Now, when you go to the website of one of these CRMs, then there'll be documentation, and when you look at the documentation, all of the demos will be in something like C#, Python, Java, curl. You would be very lucky if there was anything that was Delphi related. So in that regard, you are sort of on your own. Typically, also the applications here that we're talking about do require some sort OAuth type authentication. And if you're unfamiliar with that is basically used to retrieve a token, which then gets used in each request going out to the CRM. And in this particular case here, we were not using it just to obtain information, but we also had to push information back into the CRM. The lookup then, ensuring we had efficient data transfer, we needed to make sure that we were not pushing out or making a request which would result in too much data coming out. Similarly, we needed to make sure that we were getting the results that were expected. On the odd occasion there would be no data, and for the sake of, and let's say with an internal call, then it may be we would get too many records down, and which would then impact on the efficiency of the program. So there we did have to do some optimization and selective querying to ensure that the response times were reasonable, that they were and responsive in a time that was acceptable to the user. And then you are coming to that decision then of whether you're going to do some of this yourself or do it all yourself, or whether you're going to use a third-party component. And so now we're going to look at the factors to take into consideration if you are going to build it yourself or going to use that third-party component. Now, these are so first of all, let's look at the development time. Instead of just writing the business logic to perform that phone number lookup, we now have to write all the authentication code, the REST API type code, making sure the requests are sent in the right format, and we then have to process the result ourselves. Additionally, or as a result of that, there is going to be a higher cost in terms of development time. We then also have, if there are changes in the way things are done, be it within Salesforce or the customer's use of the CRM, that becomes our or your responsibility as well. But it does give you a sense of flexibility in that you've got full control over what happens. So if we contrast those factors there in doing it yourself with using a third-party component, then the development time, rather than you having to write everything yourself, you now only can have to deal with the business logic, and as a result, the development time may decrease significantly. Rather than the cost being in terms of development time, you now are paying for another product, and there may be other costs associated, such as driver costs. If you've got to install something locally onto each machine. On the other hand, though, the vendor deals with updates, but then how long do you wait? And if there is a problem, how long does it take to fix? And you are, also, let's say, potentially limited to the features of that component. What if information, and in our case, there was information stored in custom fields or in the system, and does your third-party component handle that? Using a tool like Unidac can allow you to concentrate on the business logic alone versus it becoming just a small part of everything else. We also did have a request, and I'm not quite sure of the exact time frame, but we were asked, whether we could integrate with, Dynamics 365. Now, we can't see into the crystal ball and know this at the time, but if you are having to integrate with, multiple CRMs, then perhaps then using that third-party tool will become a cost saver to you over time. Because again, you are only looking at the business logic and it handles everything else for you. And it does so in a unified way that rather than you also having to learn about the idiosyncrasies of each CRM and the way that they package data, and so on, that becomes, lesser of a problem. And also, like I said, you've got shorter development times, but again, it comes at what cost? Now, in our particular case, then, ourselves, but it was not without complications. Investing in a third-party library that supports, let's say multiple CRMs, it can be a real a game changer. And the question then that I leave you with is, what will make your life easier in the long run?